Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I am a military veteran who was injured in Afghanistan. I mention this only because it's important to the story. I worked for this company. I say company, but in reality, it was a guy who owned a few businesses and was the richest person in a very small town. It's important to explain how I ended up in this situation. I'll try to make it quick so I can get to the meat and potatoes, as it were. I joined the military before I even completed high school, late birthday and all of that. I chose a military career path that I figured I would enjoy, and since I love working on things, I became a mechanic. It offered a great sign-on bonus, so that was a plus. I went through basic training, only ever spending money on necessities, so I saved up quite a lot. Saved even more through advanced training for my MOS, military job. By the time I was done with both, I had half of my sign-on bonus and just short of an entire year's pay in my bank account. At my age, most would have splurged. I invested in the stock market, cryptocurrency, and paid off my parents' house. A couple of deployments later, plus the other half of my bonus, and the only thing I really ever spent money on outside of necessities was my hot rod. Needless to say, I had some money saved up and invested it as well. Long story short, when I discharged in 2018, I was pretty comfortable even after a nasty divorce. Don't get me wrong, I didn't and don't have stupid money, but because of the divorce, a lot of stocks were cashed out and split. And if anyone follows crypto over the past several years, you know how that turned out. After my divorce, I worked to recover what I lost and then just to keep busy. Like I said, I love working as a mechanic and would bounce around wherever I felt like, since a good mechanic can make money anywhere. After about 5 years of this, I decided to set roots in a small town since it would be nice and quiet. By this point, I was tired of always working on other people's cars and wanted to devote time to working on my car. I bought a small house and saw a help wanted sign at the local lube shop. Figured it would be simple work for me and something to cover my few expenses. I grabbed an application from the office, getting all kinds of looks from the townies. By the way, I'm 6'3" now, and since I discharged from the military, I stopped cutting my hair and shaving, and I have one full sleeve tattoo. Needless to say, most people cross the street instead of walking past me. When I went to turn in my application to, we'll call her Diane, the bookkeeper, she asked me a couple of questions, noticed I checked that I was a veteran, and put a Y on my application. Later that day, Diane called me. "Hey, are you available to come back in to meet the owner?" she asked. "Sure, when does he want to meet?" I replied. "Mike will be here in an hour, so if you come in then, you two can talk about the position," Diane explained. I showed up, and Mike's eyes bulged at first sight, but we got to chatting, and my southern charm won him over. He tossed me a calendar that he had made of his car collection and asked me to name the ones I recognized. There were a couple of Mustangs, a Ford GT, a Bricklin SV1, a Judge, a Demon, a Pantera, and an MXT. "Wow, that's a Bricklin SV1. Don't see many of those around," I said, genuinely impressed. Mike grinned. "Most people have no idea what that is. You really know your cars, don't you?" We chatted about cars for a bit. He offered me the position and explained, "You'll be paid $100 a day and you'll work Monday through Saturday from 8-6. No overtime, but you'll get a full day's pay even if we close shop early for some reason. Eat when you can. You'll be off every Sunday and one extra day during the week." "Sounds good to me," I replied. I started work and maybe a year passed with no issues. Then Mike asked, "Hey, could you help me out by being a relief worker for my other lube shops in neighboring towns?" "What would that involve?" I asked. "I'll give you $20 every day for travel, and basically you'd be covering so guys could take days off at the other stores," he explained. I agreed and did this for about a year. Then disaster struck. Mike met Jenny and fell madly in love. In the span of a month, they were married, and he started supporting her and her gambling problem. This is when all of the problems started. One week, I noticed my paycheck was only $250 and asked about it. Diane told me, "Apparently there have been some changes. You should really speak to Mike about it." "Sure, no problem," I said. I called up Mike and asked if we could talk about some things. He showed up with Jenny in tow, and when I asked why my pay was short, he said, "It was because of the bad weather and us closing early. It affected the business." I would have let it go at that because Mike was a nice guy, but Jenny decided to speak up. "It isn't very fair to us to have to pay you for a full day if you don't work the full 10 hours, she said, flipping her hair back dismissively. I replied calmly, "That would be true if I wasn't on a negotiated day rate. I get paid for each day I work, not hourly. That's why I don't get paid 19 hours overtime each week." She narrowed her eyes. "That's not how it works anymore. From now on, you'll be paid for the hours you worked and nothing else." "Okay, whatever you say, Jenny," I replied, trying to keep my cool. Fast forward to the next week. We had a week's worth of very busy days where we were open a couple hours later than normal to finish up with waiting customers, and I gave up one of my days off to cover for a sick coworker. So when what should have easily been over an $800 paycheck was only $600, I had some questions. I called Mike and asked, "What's going on? Why did I only get paid $600? He shrugged. "Well, that's what we agreed on. $100 a day." I looked at him blankly. "Did you forget about last week?" "What about it?" he asked. I reminded him, and he just said, "It is what it is." At this point, I was aggravated, and that's when Jenny walked in and asked, "So what is he idioting about now?" I looked at her coldly. "Well, I worked 80 hours last week, and you only paid me $600. She looked at me and said, "You're contracted labor, and you agreed to $100 per day, so why would we pay you more than that?" I looked at Mike and asked, "Is that how it is?" He just said, "You heard the lady." I went home and convinced myself that I was only working to cover my few living expenses anyway. The job isn't that hard. The only other things in this small town would have been assembling sheds or slinging chickens at a chicken plant. The next week, one of the guys I worked with was getting yelled at in front of customers by Jenny about what she claimed was an OSHA violation. She claimed that as co-owner of the company, it was her responsibility to ensure that all OSHA regulations were met, and his apparent violation was him wearing tinted safety glasses. Now, this is BS because the bays faced east-west, and with how the cars pulled in, top workers got the sun during the day, and the pit worker got it in the evening. I shook my head as I was walking in, and like a T-Rex in a dinosaur movie, it attracted Jenny's attention. "You got something to say, you big idiot?" she shouted at me. I just kept walking, not giving her the satisfaction of a response. Later, I told Diane, "You need to have a long talk with Mike before Jenny's mouth writes checks he'll have to cash." She replied nervously, "I just keep the books. Don't involve me." This behavior continued for another year, and finally, I was at my limit. On the day I started my malicious compliance, I was in a very bad mood. I had woken up to news that a good friend of mine who was responsible for me surviving being blown up in Afghanistan was taken out by a drunk driver. Not wanting to deal with anyone, I told the shop, "I'll be working pit all day. Just let me be." These guys had been working with me for a few years by now and knew something was up. I never once thought that this would be a day that I would need to deal with Jenny, since I was working at the furthest shop from the main shop, and it was in the opposite direction of the casinos. But I wasn't so lucky, or maybe I was. Mike and Jenny showed up, and she stormed into the pit and screamed, "Mike, come look at this mess." I had no idea what she was talking about, because I always kept the pit spotless and would clean as I worked, whereas a lot of others would clean at the end of the day. Her complaint was about 50 of the most common oil filters we would use in a day being stacked on my waste drums for easy access for me, so I wouldn't have to wait for the top guys to hand me filters. I did this all of the time, and Mike knew about it and never cared before. He came down, looked around, and told me like he was talking to a teenager, "Clean up this pigsty." I shook my head. "Today's not the day, Mike. Move on and take her with you." This apparently infuriated Jenny, who of course thought it was the utmost disrespect to her and Mike. He told me, "If you don't like it, you're free to leave." So I left. Now don't freak out. This story isn't over yet. That was just the first flap of the butterfly's wings that started a massive crap storm. The next day, Mike called me. "Hey, can you swing by the main store on your way home?" I thought he was going to apologize about the day before. I figured one of the other guys might have told him why I was so on edge. No, that was not what this was about. Mike was calling me in to inform me, for the next 6 months, you'll be on a probation period for your actions, and for these 6 months, you'll only be paid $50 a day and you won't receive the normal $20 a day for driving to the other shops. "Are you serious about this?" I asked. "Have you seriously considered what you're doing?" This is when Mike let his true colors shine. "You're lucky you weren't fired for your constant disrespect towards me and the co-owner Jenny. If I didn't pity you for being a struggling disabled veteran, I would have fired you long ago. I never once discussed my money with anyone I worked with. Why Mike thought I was broke and desperate was solely based on my appearance, from what I could tell." Something inside me snapped and I just started laughing. "What do you think is so funny?" he demanded. I stood to my full height, stepped to him like a drill sergeant about to give some wall-to-wall counseling, and said, "You should reconsider your life choices and who you choose to go into business with." Mike then said, "What, you gonna sue me or something? Go ahead if you think you can afford to. What do you get from the VA, like $1,000 a month? I know how bad you need this job." That wasn't my plan, but it kicked in my malicious compliance, and since I'll always be a soldier ready to go to war, That day, I called a labor lawyer, paid the $3,000 retainer, and started my lawsuit for unsafe work environment, unpaid overtime, and minimum wage violations, all while continuing to work for him. It was glorious, but still not enough. It took about the 6 months of my probation for the lawyer to get all of the paperwork together and filed, slow rolling it at my request. This lawyer was a former Marine, so I think he had an idea of what I had in mind. After everything was ready, my lawyer filed the paperwork and Mike and Jenny were served at the main store while I was at work. They read the paperwork and the process server for my lawyer stuck around to be a witness to what I knew would be coming. When they read that I was suing them, Mike and Jenny flipped out. "I should kick your ass, you ungrateful piece of crap," Mike shouted. "You're ducking fired, you pussy," Jenny screamed. "I bet you weren't even really in the military." The process server recorded everything, gave it to my lawyer, who added to the lawsuit unlawful termination because it is illegal to fire an employee because they are suing you. The next day, I opened up my own lube shop car wash combo and started recruiting my former co-workers at higher pay plus commission. "Hey Dave, how would you like to make $15 an hour plus 5% of what you bring in?" I called one of my old teammates. "You serious? I'm making $11 flat with Mike and Jenny," he replied. "Dead serious. And there's something else. We're all suing them for unpaid wages and overtime. Want in?" They all wanted to jump in on the lawsuit, and my lawyer was more than happy to add them to it. So 2 years down the road, after subpoenas to get security footage from the shops, the books going back 5 years, and sworn testimonies, we went to a mediation to settle. They offered a measly $50,000 to split between the 15 of us on the lawsuit when that didn't even cover the unpaid overtime. "That's not even close to what you owe," my lawyer told their attorney firmly. We declined. Then our Apache came in to save the day, sent by the IRS, delivered to my lawyer because of a request for the company's tax documents. Mike held each lube shop as its own individual LLC, each with its own tax ID and employment record. Mike and Jenny thought it would be a smart move to file for a tax credit for employing a veteran at each of the 6 shops. In their filing, they claimed that they employed a veteran, me, as a full-time employee working a minimum of 36 hours a week at a rate of $12 per hour. The government gives a tax break to companies that employ veterans. At the next mediation, my lawyer presented the reports to their lawyer and the mediator, and after a quick 20-minute discussion, Mike and Jenny came back and agreed to settle at our request of $400,000 in unpaid overtime to be split between 15 of us, all legal fees, and a personal settlement for the unlawful termination suit of $20,000 for each shop I was listed as an employee at, as well as unpaid wages for the 6 months I was only paid $5 an hour. Their only demand was that we all agree to a gag order so that nothing would leave the mediator's table. Of course, we signed and we took our paychecks, but somehow their tax paperwork made its way to just the right person at the IRS, and they decided to audit Mike and Jenny. An investigation was opened on them for tax fraud. I sold the shop I opened to the guys that came over and jumped in on the lawsuit. They each paid me $8,000, and I washed my hands of it. I put my house up for sale and moved away. I did go back about 8 months later because the guy who was supposed to take care of the lawn had apparently been arrested, and the yard went a few months without being cut before the city informed me that they were going to fine me $100 a day until it was brought to code. So I went down to mow it myself. While there, I decided to check in with my realtor to see if there was anything we could do about yard maintenance. And who do I see but little old Diane sitting pretty at the front desk. "Well, look who it is," she exclaimed when she saw me. "You won't believe everything that's happened." Diane couldn't speak fast enough to tell me what all had happened, and it was perfect. What I thought was an Apache turned out to be an atom bomb. Mike filed bankruptcy to try and not go broke after making a plea deal for probation for tax fraud and paying a ton in unpaid taxes. Jenny took off with some dude she met at a casino. I asked Diane 2 questions. "Do you know who reported the fraudulent tax paperwork to the IRS, and what happened with Mike's car collection?" "I have no idea who reported them," she said with a small smile. "And as for the cars, check the parking behind the realtor's office before leaving." On my way out, I took a peek behind the realtor's office to see a safety green SV1 sitting there. Apparently, Mike started selling off his cars early and cheap, hoping he would be able to buy them back after filing bankruptcy. "Is that what I think it is?" I asked, pointing at the car. "Yep," Diane replied. "Got it for a steal. Mike was desperate. Ironic, isn't it? To this day, I have no idea who, if anyone, actually turned in the paperwork to the IRS. My personal theory is whoever was tasked with compiling it all with their claims noticed something strange and reported it. However it happened, it couldn't have happened to anyone more deserving. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened a few years ago, but I'm still savoring the sweet taste of victory every time I drive past what used to be an HOA development and is now my very profitable rental property empire. Let me start from the beginning. I inherited a pretty decent chunk of land from my grandfather, about 15 acres on the outskirts of town that had been in our family for generations. The property was mostly undeveloped, except for an old farmhouse where my grandfather lived until he passed. The land sat right next to what was becoming a pretty upscale suburban neighborhood, complete with one of those HOAs that thinks they run the world. When I first inherited the property, I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I was working in the city about an hour away and didn't have immediate plans to move out there. I figured I'd sit on it for a while, maybe fix up the farmhouse eventually, and see what opportunities came up. The property taxes weren't too bad, and honestly, it felt good knowing I had this little piece of family history. That's when the homeowners association from the neighboring development decided to make my life interesting. About 6 months after I inherited the land, I got a letter from the HOA president. The letter was formal and condescending in that special way that HOA correspondence always manages to be. Basically, they were informing me that my property was an eyesore that was negatively impacting their property values. The farmhouse needed work, sure, but calling it an eyesore was pretty rich coming from people who thought beige vinyl siding was the height of architectural achievement. The letter went on to strongly encourage me to either develop the property in accordance with their community standards or consider selling it to a developer who would. They even included a helpful list of approved contractors and architectural styles that would be harmonious with the neighborhood aesthetic. I wrote back politely explaining that my property wasn't part of their HOA and that I'd develop it on my own timeline. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The letters kept coming. First it was monthly, then weekly. They started getting more aggressive, talking about code violations and property maintenance standards. They somehow got the city involved, sending inspectors out to find violations. Most of the citations were petty stuff. Tall grass, peeling paint on an old barn, that sort of thing. Nothing major, but annoying enough that I had to spend time and money addressing their complaints. Then they tried a different approach. The HOA president showed up at my door one Saturday morning with a proposal. They had found a developer who was willing to buy my land at fair market value and incorporate it into their community. They painted it as this great opportunity for me to cash out and for them to maintain their property values. When I declined, that's when things got really interesting. The next letter I received was different. This one came from their lawyer and was full of legal terminology about something called adverse possession and community development standards. But the key part was this. They were claiming that since I hadn't been actively using or maintaining the property according to community standards, and since their development had been treating it as part of their common area for maintenance purposes, they had a legal claim to at least part of my land. Here's where I made the decision that would eventually lead to their downfall. Instead of immediately fighting back with my own lawyer, I decided to see exactly how far they were willing to push this. I wrote back and told them that if they believed they had a legal claim to my property, they should pursue it through proper legal channels. I said I would review any documentation they provided and respond appropriately. What I didn't tell them is that I had already quietly contacted a property lawyer and had my deed and property boundaries professionally surveyed. Everything was crystal clear. I owned every square inch of that 15 acres, and there was absolutely no legal basis for their claims. But I played along. They filed some kind of motion with the county claiming portions of my land as part of their community based on their maintenance activities and some ridiculous interpretation of local ordinances. Instead of immediately presenting my clear title documentation, I let the legal process play out. I responded to their filings with just enough resistance to keep things moving but not enough to shut down their plans entirely. Meanwhile, they started getting bolder. First, they began maintaining larger portions of my property. They mowed areas they claimed were common space and even installed some landscaping. Then they started talking about development plans. The HOA held community meetings about their vision for expanding their neighborhood onto the acquired property. That's when they made the mistake that sealed their fate. They decided to prove their ownership claim by actually developing the land. The HOA took out a significant loan and hired contractors to build 3 custom homes on what they claimed was now their property. These weren't cheap houses either. We're talking about $500,000 homes with all the upscale finishes that would fit their community aesthetic. I watched the construction begin from the farmhouse windows. Excavators, foundation work, framing, the whole 9 yards. Every day I could see the progress as they poured tens of thousands of dollars into construction on land that I absolutely, unquestionably owned. My lawyer kept asking if I wanted to stop this before it went too far. I told him to wait. The construction took about 8 months. 3 beautiful modern homes with professional landscaping, paved driveways, and all the HOA-approved aesthetic touches. The houses were gorgeous, honestly, much nicer than anything I could have afforded to build myself. Throughout the construction, the HOA kept up their legal pressure. They filed additional motions claiming that their substantial investment in developing the property further strengthened their adverse possession claim. They argued that they were acting as the responsible property owners by investing in community development. I continued to respond just enough to keep the legal proceedings moving without actually resolving anything. My lawyer thought I was crazy, but I had a plan. The day the final inspections were completed and the homes received their certificates of occupancy, I made my move. I filed a motion with the county presenting my grandfather's original deed, my inheritance documentation, and the professional survey results. Everything was ironclad. The documentation clearly showed that not only did I own all 15 acres, but the HOA had built their 3 homes entirely on my property without my permission. The motion requested immediate possession of all structures and improvements built on my land, along with damages for trespass and unauthorized use of my property. You should have seen the panic that ensued. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that their good faith improvements to the property gave them some kind of equity claim. They pointed to all the money they had invested and argued that forcing them to turn over the completed homes would be unjust enrichment. But here's the beautiful part about property law. When you build on someone else's land without permission, those improvements generally become the property of the landowner. It's called accession, and it's been settled law for centuries. My lawyer presented this principle to the court along with documentation showing that the HOA had been repeatedly informed that I disputed their claim to the property. Their decision to proceed with construction despite knowing the ownership was contested eliminated any argument about good faith improvements. The judge ruled in my favor on every point. The HOA was ordered to immediately cease all activities on my property and turn over the 3 completed homes along with all improvements they had made. They were also liable for damages related to trespassing and unauthorized use of my land during the construction period. But it gets better. Since the HOA had taken out substantial loans to finance the construction, they were now facing financial ruin. They owed hundreds of thousands of dollars for construction costs, but they had no assets to show for it. The 3 houses they built were now legally mine. The HOA president who had started this whole mess tried to negotiate some kind of settlement. They offered to sell me the houses at cost, as if they were doing me a favor. When I declined, they begged me to at least reimburse them for the construction costs. I reminded them that they had been repeatedly informed that I disputed their claim to the property. I had told them from the beginning to pursue their claim through proper legal channels, which is exactly what they did. I had simply responded to their legal actions appropriately and let the courts decide who owned the property. In other words, I had given them exactly what they asked for, a legal resolution to the property dispute. The aftermath was even sweeter than I had hoped. The HOA had to declare bankruptcy. Several board members faced personal financial liability because they had personally guaranteed some of the construction loans. The developer they had been working with sued them for misrepresentation about their ownership of the land. Meanwhile, I suddenly found myself the owner of 3 brand new, high-end homes that I hadn't paid a dime to build. I decided to rent them out, and given their location and quality, I had no trouble finding tenants willing to pay premium rents. The ironic part is that the houses really did improve the neighborhood. The rental income from the 3 properties more than covers the property taxes and maintenance for the entire 15 acres, with plenty left over. I've since renovated the old farmhouse and moved out there myself. Every month when I collect rent from tenants living in houses that the HOA built for me, I think about how this all started with them demanding that I develop my property according to their standards. I did exactly what they asked. I let them develop the property according to their standards, and then I took legal ownership of the results. The best part is driving through what used to be their exclusive community and seeing the for sale signs where HOA members had to sell their homes to cover their losses from the failed development scheme. Property values in their neighborhood actually went down after the bankruptcy, which is the opposite of what they were trying to achieve by pressuring me in the first place. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stopped them earlier before they invested so much money in construction, but then I remember all those condescending letters about property maintenance and community standards, and all the legal fees I had to pay responding to their frivolous claims. They wanted to prove they owned my land by developing it. I let them prove it, and then I proved them wrong. These days, I'm actually thinking about expanding the rental operation. I've got plenty of land left, and now I have a proven track record with high-quality rental properties. Who knows? Maybe I'll even start my own HOA for my tenants. One that actually respects property rights. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best way to deal with bullies is to give them exactly what they're asking for and let them face the consequences of their own actions. They demanded a legal resolution to the property dispute, and that's exactly what they got. The next one is a petty revenge story. In 6th grade, I had this math teacher named Ms. White who was pretty strict. Our school was honestly very diverse, but she was very, as her name suggests, white. I have a pretty difficult name to say as it is Hawaiian. I am half Japanese, half white, but both sides lived in Hawaii for 3+ generations. My name is Kaui. It looks daunting, but it's just Kaui, so honestly not very difficult, IMO. Anyway, Ms. White stumbled on my name when she read attendance, so I did the usual, oh, it's pronounced __. You know what she did? She literally went, I'll call you Catherine. Let me tell you, I was flabbergasted. Like, it was a private, very diverse school, and I had never had this happen. Teachers had horribly mispronounced my name, but this was definitely new. Also, no offense to any Catherines, but I love my name, and it has a lot of meaning to my family, and TBH, it sounds cooler than Catherine. Take no offense, please. I was so surprised that for the first 2 weeks I kinda just let it happen. But at some point it was just irking me because she made no effort to learn how to say my name. I never told her she could call me Catherine, and on top of that, she could have even asked me for a nickname or my middle name or something. So I started calling her by her first name, Jessica. She was the kind of teacher who no one called by her first name. Even the other teachers called her Ms. White. I had to look in the yearbook from the year before to find it, but from that day on, she was Jessica. And when that didn't make her mad enough, she was Jessie or Jess or JJ or any other nicknames I could think of. She never yelled at me or anything, she just corrected me and said Ms. White, and then I would ignore it. For example, Jessa, that's Ms. White. Jessica, I don't get number 3, can you explain? She never lost her temper, but was always annoyed LOL. She called me Catherine for the rest of the year, so not the most satisfying story, but I was happy with that revenge. Ms. White apparently got fired 2 years later for microaggressions towards students of color, and honestly, I'm not surprised. I just wanted to share this story because I figured y'all would enjoy it. Pasting this edit in BC of the amount of comments I am getting, LOL. Here you go. Hey, I'm getting a lot of confusion about the pronunciation of my name. Many comments are very kind and just saying how they originally thought it was pronounced like Maui. Others are telling me I pronounce my name wrong. IDK, man, but I'll do my best to explain some basics for y'all. My name is Kaui. In Hawaiian, each vowel is pronounced. None are silent. However, native speakers tend to blend them together. For example, a plus U would make an AU sound. If you say that fast, it sounds like ow. So when a native speaker says my name, it may sound like Kaui, very similar to Maui. However, there is a difference because really the O is still pronounced a little more. In addition, one difference between Kaui and Maui is the okina, the little apostrophe thingy. In reality, it's a slightly different symbol, but I'm lazy. This basically counts as a consonant and as a little pause. So basically the ow and I sounds do not merge together because they are separated by the okina. Now, why can't you just say Kaui? Good question. You can. I'll still respond. But basically, you are saying my name as if it has no okina when it does. Not a big deal. But that's the difference. Hawaii. Also, there are some people saying I'm wrong because Hawaii isn't pronounced Hawaii. True, it isn't. The traditional spelling is Hawaii and pronunciation is Hawaii. Basically, the A and the H merge, the W and the A and the I merge, the W makes a V sound since it's surrounded by vowels, and then we have an okina and an I, hence Hawaii. Why it's spelled and pronounced differently normally is BC, it's the anglicized version. Almost same spelling, just no okina. And the W is seen as making the W sound since that's how it is in English. I am not all-knowing, I don't even speak Hawaiian, I just know some basic facts. But feel free to ask me more questions. Hope this helps. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A couple of years ago, I got shuffled out of the business side and into IT during a reorg. The official reason was better alignment with software delivery. The real reason? I'm expensive, I don't do sales, and IT has a bigger budget. Also, and this is educated speculation, I kept not approving its builds for not meeting specs, which apparently makes me difficult and not solution-oriented. So now I report to the executive I had previously challenged over the quality of his team's work. Since joining IT, everything has to be a ticket. Doesn't matter if it's a question, a clarification, or divine revelation. No ticket, no work. PMs handle ticket creation and prioritization, which sounds fine in theory, except my actual job is to consult with business analysts and developers. I know more about the rules, regulations, and use cases of our software than anyone in the company, and my work doesn't easily fall into a ticket as it's more of a problem-solving role for existing tickets. Still, no ticket equals sign no work. Bureaucracy over brains. Clients, especially senior ones, tend to reach out to me directly because I can actually answer their questions. Normally, I just respond and if needed, make a ticket afterward for tracking, but management didn't like that. After one particularly spirited discussion over delays to close low-priority tickets in lieu of responding to high-priority client emails, my boss told me to stop responding to client emails altogether. I was to forward them to PMs, who would create, prioritize, and assign tickets. I explained patiently that these emails often come from executives and need quick turnaround. Boss's response? Follow the process or we won't know how overworked you are. Okay then, boss. Let's follow the process. A week later, I get an email from the CFO of one of our biggest clients asking for details about a customized build. Normally, I'd get an estimate out in a couple of hours. Instead, I CC'd my boss and PM, confirmed I'd received the request, and politely asked them to create and assign a ticket. A few days later, the CFO followed up. We need this by Friday, I replied again, CCing everyone, apologizing for the delay, and asking that the assigned resource take note of the urgency, knowing full well no one had assigned the ticket. Behind the scenes, I had already done the estimate and informed the client what was happening. Spoiler, nothing. Suddenly, my boss is frantically pinging me. Why haven't you gotten back to the CFO? I calmly reminded him that 1. He told me to only work on assigned tickets. 2. He was CC'd on every email. 3. He'd have to ask the PM for a status update. There was a long, delicious silence before he finally replied, Okay, you don't need a ticket for everything. In the future, if it's from an executive, just respond and make a ticket afterward. Sure thing, boss. Glad we cleared that up. I sent the estimate, everyone was happy, and peace was restored, and better yet, management now puts results over process. Well, the first part anyway, but peace and results? Well, that's a malicious compliance story for another day. The next one is an entitled people story. Hey there, everyone. I'm writing this story from Canada, where I was born and raised and have lived all my life. I have been lucky enough in life to have a well-paying sales job, a beautiful wife, and 2 beautiful twin daughters. My family is everything to me, which is why I strive to provide for them in every way I can, financially, emotionally, and by making their lives joyful and meaningful. For my twin daughters, sometimes this means providing something different. One of my twin daughters has been disabled since a young age. We have made modifications in our house to make it more easily accessible for her. Just because she's a younger child, my twins are 10, with a condition doesn't mean she can't do things or have fun. For example, you know those playgrounds that a lot of families have in their backyard? Well, we have one, but it is customized for my daughter. Both of our daughters play on it, and it's great to see my other daughter supporting her sister with the condition. It makes her feel like she's normal. Part of the playground is a cute little treehouse that is easily accessible for my daughters. You would think that a special treehouse wouldn't be a big deal, but I guess I should mention at this point that we live in a homeowners association. I know, we should have known better, right? But I will admit, our homeowners association was actually pretty nice. They were very in touch with the neighborhood, and we knew some of the board members personally. They were all friendly, and if we ever had a violation, usually they would talk to us before giving us a fine and even give us options on how we could comply. This all changed when we got a new homeowners association president. We'll call her Karen. I think her name was actually Sam, but she definitely acted more like a Karen. It's even stranger because she didn't even live in our neighborhood. They literally voted her in from the outside. I thought this was odd, but this is also the first and only homeowners association I've ever dealt with, so who am I to doubt it? Well, I had the right to doubt Karen as soon as she questioned the treehouse. As soon as she got voted in, she started doing random inspections herself. I thought it was odd because she was inspecting every house in the neighborhood. She did have a few board members with her, but still. Anyways, one day she showed up at our house randomly, and the inspection seemed to be going fine, besides the fact she said we had the wrong kind of wood chips in our garden, until she saw the treehouse. She immediately stormed over to the house and started criticizing it, asking why it was so big and how ugly it was. Even if my daughter wasn't disabled, this is very offensive. Why is an adult criticizing a child's treehouse so harshly? She asked us why it was so big, and we tried explaining that it was specially built for our disabled daughter. And it's not like she could say we were lying. Our daughter was literally sitting on the porch. Whenever we tried to give her an explanation, though, she just kept interrupting us and saying how it needed to go or we would be fined. We spent a lot of money to have it custom built for my daughter, and while I am never one to feel entitled, I feel that it was fair she had a treehouse just like every other child did. Yeah, it was a little bigger, but it's not like it was in anyone's way. It is in our backyard. Apparently Karen was serious. We didn't take the treehouse down because, well, why would we? Karen didn't stop, though. She sent us multiple notices in the mail and even posted a letter on our door stating that we had to remove it or else they would remove it themselves. She even sent us multiple letters in the mail stating that we owed $10,000 for breaking the Homeowners Association rules. Obviously, we didn't want this, but I wasn't sure what to do. Well, I guess it wasn't too long until I didn't have to ponder too long on what to do. Because one afternoon when I got home from work, I noticed that the special treehouse was completely trashed. When I say trashed, I mean trashed. It looked like it had been hit with something. It was missing support beams and had scuff marks all over the painted metal parts. We lived in a nice neighborhood, so my immediate thought was that homeowners association. Karen had something to do with this. I didn't have any security cameras, so I couldn't prove it. But who else would trash a playground for a disabled kid? It seemed too odd to me that she had a problem with it. Even after we explained that it wasn't just any playground, it was a special one for our daughter. Well, anyways, we filed a police report for vandalism, but we didn't know who did it. I mean, technically we didn't, but we couldn't prove it. So the police said they would keep an eye out and let us know if they saw anything or found anything out. But they didn't have to do that because just 2 days later, our neighbor caught Karen trying to drive some sort of small tractor digger, I don't know, I don't work in construction, into our backyard. I'm assuming it was to remove our playground. What else would she have it for? I wasn't home, but of course the neighbor called me, and I was on my way in no time. He also called the cops, and apparently several neighbors came out to block Karen from trying to run away. Luckily, when I got there, the cops had just arrived. Our neighbors provided witness statements, and they were able to prove that Karen was trying to break into our backyard with the digger. I guess the pressure was too much for Karen because she admitted to trashing it the first time because we were crappy residents who thought we were special. Karen ended up pleading guilty, which helped her somewhat. But she did end up having to pay to replace the custom playground. We ended up pressing charges against her for violating the Accessible Canada Act, in which she was found guilty. In the end, Karen got 1 year in jail, had to replace our playground, and pay us $10,000. By the way, we used that money to upgrade the treehouse and make it even bigger. Duck you, Karen. Even though she obviously got kicked out of the Homeowners Association. I will say the Homeowners Association is actually back to being nice now. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Pre-children, PC. My wife and I purchased our first house. We were very excited to be homeowners. We were particularly proud to show off all of our gardening and yard skills we had developed over the years of childhood chores. Don't tell Mom, but who knew that the seemingly punishing yard work would actually translate to adulthood? We were off to a great start with a meticulous yard, spending way too much time and money. On my small suburban lot is the utility box for one of the 2 cable choices in the neighborhood, along with EE Cable Corp, you know, the one Forbes always lists as one of the worst companies in the country. I came home from work one day and noticed that the utility box was open and the cables were scattered all over. I didn't think too much of it at the time and made a mental note, assuming they were on a break. The next day, I came home from work and the utility box was still a mess. I called the Evil Empire Cable Company to kindly let them know that they had left a mess in my yard after a repair. They told me nicely that they would be out in the neighborhood the following day to finish the work. Many weeks came and went without them fixing their mess. It was coming up on our first pool party, and we wanted the house to be perfect. I called the EE Cable Corp again, not to bore you with the details of the conversation, but it ended rudely with them saying they would be out there eventually. Now I see why nobody likes this Evil Empire Cable Company. At our first PC pool party, maybe after a margarita or 4, we started aimlessly discussing the Evil Empire Cable Corp. Now we were a bunch of engineers and a truck driver, important later, drinking margaritas. The discussion turned from complaining to scheming. While poking around the utility box and the box on the side of my house, we noticed that EE Cable Corp did not use multiple line blocks on the cable. They merely hooked up the cable from the house to the utility box. Easy peasy, nice and easy. I'm guessing the lack of security is a genuine artifact of Midwest nice. Why protect something that nobody steals? We also noticed that only one house out of the 8 was serviced with cable. So we proceeded to hook up free cable to the 7 remaining houses. We neatly stuffed all the wires and closed the utility box. As I mentioned, the only non-engineer in the group was a truck driver. We had an earlier pointless discussion about different padlocks and why truck drivers use a specific round kind. Basically, it's impossible to break with small bolt cutters. He grabbed a large round padlock out of his truck, and we tried to place it on the utility box. It wouldn't fit because the hole was too small, so after a few seconds of drilling, we placed our own padlock on the EE Cable Corp's utility box, along with providing 7 houses with free cable protected by an industrial padlock designed to prevent trucker theft. After meeting the other neighbors and making sure they were trustworthy, I let them know about our party. Each one smiled and began enjoying free cable. A number of months later, while enjoying free cable, the EE Cable Corp was in the backyard staring at our handiwork. They bent over regularly, really studying the padlock. I could only imagine their discussion on what they were seeing. They brought out the bolt cutters from the truck. I assumed they carried them in case they lost a key or the padlock rusted. Now looking at the bolt cutters, I could tell this would be a futile exercise. After only about 3 minutes, they both shrugged their shoulders, got back in their truck, and left. That was the last time we ever saw the EE Cable Company. Since all but one of us was enjoying free cable, there was no reason for them to be out there. Our gig was up when the one who did pay for cable, whom we never really met, moved. The next technician was very dedicated. After 3 trips, each with a larger bolt cutter, resulting in using one more than 4 feet long, they put everything back to the way it was before. And thus concludes the story of 7 houses enjoying free cable for more than 4 years, due to the laziness of a single technician and a rude customer service rep. The next one is a petty revenge story. I stopped at one of those candy stores inside malls that you always see, with tons of bins full of random candy and bags that you can fill up yourself using tongs, where you get charged a crazy price by the pound. During this visit, they seemed to be running a special. Next to the bags used for filling up candy, there was a sign saying free cups to store your candy. So instead of opting for the bag, I chose to use the cup, knowing that they would still weigh it and charge accordingly. When I reached the counter and they weighed the candy, the total appeared on the register. However, I had to question it because the price seemed to be about double what I was expecting. I asked about the weight of the candy and requested a breakdown of the pricing. The 2 clerks behind the register looked irritated that I had to question them, but reluctantly provided me with the weight. They also mentioned that they charged me several dollars for the cheap plastic cup that was supposed to be free. "Aren't those cups supposed to be free?" I asked. "No, they are not free, they're $4, they replied. "But there's a big sign saying free cups," I pointed out. "No, there isn't," they insisted. I walked over and pointed to the sign that clearly said free. "Oh, we used to have free cups, but we ran out, so we put jars there instead," they explained. "Isn't that a bit misleading?" I questioned. "No, because these are jars," they responded. "Wouldn't it be fair to assume that someone looking at a sign that says free cups and sees a plastic container next to it would think it's a cup?" I countered. "No, because it's not a cup," they argued. "There is nothing else around the sign, only the containers and a sign that says free," I pointed out. They didn't respond. I was getting nowhere. "Fine, I'll just dump the candy in a bag and you can keep the jar," I said frustratedly. "No, you can't do that because you already touched the jar and we can't sell it to someone else now," they said smugly, expecting my defeat. But then I remembered that they hadn't taken my credit card yet. "Okay then, just keep the candy too. Bye," I declared. They realized that they would now have to throw out both the candy and the jar that I had touched, and the smirks they were trying to hide quickly turned into scowls. I could feel their daggers staring at me as I walked out. The next one is an entitled people story. Since the family intervention, my parents have kept my brother in check, and they are doing okay in terms of making up for years of treating me like crap. They've even promised to host my next birthday and have my favorite cake with my name on it. My brother overheard this because my parents had him doing dishes in the kitchen, and he just stopped what he was doing and went right to his room. No fake crying, just a complete shutdown. He still glares at me from his window every time I leave when I come to visit. A little while ago, my parents allowed my brother some privileges for good behavior, though to my brother, they're basically the opposite of anything he'd like. My parents decided to let him have a little fun for good behavior. So my dad dug out his old N64 and Game Boy Color from the 90s. He still had most of his old games for both systems, and also had an old CRT TV to hook them up to. When they offered them to my brother, he just complained that they were old and boring. My dad just said he could suit himself then and go back to reading. It took one night before my brother was begging to have the old 90s game systems. He used to have many game systems, a gaming PC, and even a gaming chair with Bluetooth speakers on it. Now all he has is a folding chair or his bed to sit on when gaming. I came by for a visit around the time he first got the N64, because my parents wanted to have me over for dinner, and I got to see my brother in his room yelling at the old CRT TV while playing Mario 64. He really wasn't happy, especially since he couldn't even go online to check for guides, walkthroughs, or cheat codes. For the Game Boy Color, I saw he had some Pokemon games and at least one Donkey Kong. My dad has said that if my brother is extra good by the end of the summer, they'll upgrade him to a Game Boy Advance. My parents quickly realized, though, that the Game Boy Color would eat AA batteries, so my brother has to use a power cord for it now. And he does play it, maybe because he used to have a phone in his hands playing app games so much. Because my brother likes cycling but no longer owns a bike since our parents sold it, he was without an outlet to exercise. My dad found a used exercise bike on FB Marketplace and put it in my brother's room. He also got a used CD player mini boombox from somewhere the same day. So yeah, my brother just rides that exercise bike since he can't go outside unless it's to do chores. And he rides it aggressively. He tunes into whatever music gets him going and then he rides that exercise bike hard. From the look on his face, I'd call it hate riding. Almost like what you'd expect to see on the face of a vindictive prison inmate exercising in their cell and waiting for the day they can get out and get revenge. I had mentioned this to my parents, and they have the same worries that I do. So my dad started burning CDs with my brother's favorite music that used to be on his gaming computer that they also sold. Each burned CD has 10 songs, and he would get one for every week of good behavior. He's only gotten one so far since this started, not because of bad behavior, but because not enough time has gone by for him to get more. I'm not sure if I'd call my brother's behavior good. He's just not really being bad. I don't hear him complaining out loud anymore most of the time, but I see it on his face, especially when he glares at me from his window when I get on my mini bike to go home. He definitely resents me, but it's not the same look he gives our parents when they aren't looking. He glares at them like they destroyed his life. But if I were to put it into words, he glares at me with envy, like I have everything he wants. The look just seems to say, just wait till I'm 18. I remember having those same thoughts when I wanted to move the hell out after high school, but I made sure I had life plans with the help of my aunt when I moved out. But my brother doesn't know anything about how to do that, so he's probably still thinking of it in the simplest ways a kid usually would. Oh great, now I'm sounding like a know-it-all. I have tried to talk with my brother, but he doesn't have much to say. I've been stopping by every few days to spend some time with him. We don't speak much because he's gotten very quiet, but he does seem to enjoy having someone to play with since our parents won't. He eagerly hands me a controller every time I'm there. We've mostly been playing racing games like Mario Kart on Dad's old N64 in my brother's room, and he gets pretty aggressive while playing. He keeps swinging the controller around wildly with nearly every move he makes, and has even shoved me over a few times when he was losing. I've learned to brace my legs so he can't do that. He had a few light tantrums for losing, but he is getting a little better. I've had some Game FAQs walkthroughs and cheat codes for some of the games he's been playing on the old N64 printed out at the local library and put them in a binder for him, and that's made him be a little nicer to me. Our parents wanted to get some stuff for summer homeschooling for my brother, but I warned them that was probably not a good idea. He's already in an almost constant state of anger, and the goal is to mellow him out and make him more accepting that life won't go his way like it used to anymore, not piss him off even more. My dad got angry with me about how he's the father and not me, and that sparked an argument where I reminded him of the things that went on over the past decade. All of the favoritism, all of how I was blamed for so much, even how I had to hide my money at my aunt's house because they kept letting my brother try to steal it. I didn't outright say he's a bad parent, but it was heavily implied. He backed off, and my mom told him I was right, and trying to force homeschooling on my brother will not help. That made my dad shut down, and he went to drink alone in the living room. My mom has apologized to me repeatedly for her past actions. She says she blames herself because it was her idea to coddle my brother so much, and my dad just went along with it. She told me that back then she was never thinking ahead to what my brother would be like as an adult. She basically refused to admit he was going to grow up, so she just kept spoiling him to try and keep him here as a baby. My parents have scheduled couples counseling, but it's going to be a while before they get in due to the wait period. My dad is pretty obviously not looking forward to it. It's harder to make him admit wrongdoing than my mom. He caved and admitted how much he'd screwed up during the family intervention. But since then, he's tried to act like he's just a normal parent. But I've made it clear that pretending that crap didn't happen won't make it go away, and my mom agrees with me. So that's where things are right now. Hopefully my next update will be better. The next one is an entitled parent story. This is what happened last night. EM, entitled Mom, who's my aunt, EC, her daughter, and S, my sister. EM called my dad last night at about 11 when my dad was half asleep. EM, how could you do this to us? Aren't we family? Why did you shame us like this? It was so many years ago. Couldn't you just let it go? My dad had no idea what she was going on about, so he asked her what had happened. She told him that we had posted on Reddit about my sister's birthday. My dad didn't know or care what Reddit was and asked, "What's the big deal?" EM, wow, so your daughters do things without telling you? You should keep an eye on them. Don't let them get out of hand. You should have taught them manners. My name just exposed us and shamed us online. Dad, what are you saying? How did she expose you? She hasn't even talked to you in years. EM, she posted a story about us, and as soon as EC read it, we knew it was about us. I haven't divulged any names in that story, not even mine. Dad asked me if I did that and why, so it took a total of 20 minutes to explain to Dad what Reddit is and what I did. I told him that I had just narrated a story and hadn't exposed her identity in any way, so Dad just handed me the phone so I could explain it to her. As soon as I said hello, EM started screaming at me so loudly that it could be heard outside the phone. EM, you idiot! How could you do that? Who do you think you are? You poisoned my child and then made it up as if I was overreacting? Take that post down now and apologize for it on that subreddit. If you don't, I'm going to sue you. I was so angry that I just said no, I won't do anything of that sort. And that I would love to see how you can sue me all the way from California. EM then proceeded to call me and my sister whores and similar things. My dad took away the phone and asked her to never contact any of us again and blocked her. So hey there, Aunt Sheila. I hope you all read this. The next one is an entitled people story. Ever since I was a child, I had dreamt of embarking on an incredible journey. And when the opportunity finally arose, I seized it without hesitation. Little did I know that my year abroad would turn into a harrowing tale of betrayal and the fight to reclaim what was rightfully mine. My company had selected me for a prestigious work assignment overseas. The thought of spending an entire year exploring a new culture and making lasting memories was exhilarating. Of course, before setting off on my transatlantic journey, I had to ensure that my house would be taken care of in my absence. Selling it was out of the question, considering the company would cover my living expenses while abroad. I thought I had a foolproof plan in place. Unbeknownst to me, a series of events unfolded during my absence that would haunt me for months. Rather than learning about these incidents in a few days upon my return, I'll recount them chronologically, as they occurred over the course of that fateful year. It all began when my homeowners association discovered my departure, and their greed set into motion a calamitous chain of events. Now let me tell you about the infamous homeowners association that governed my neighborhood. They were notorious for their overbearing regulations, from the length of grass to the precise placement of mailboxes. To avoid unnecessary conflict, I obediently followed their rules, striving to keep the peace. In my absence, the person I had hired to maintain my lawn decided that since I couldn't physically inspect the property, his services were no longer necessary on a regular basis. This devious scheme involved neglecting the lawn for several months, only to tend to it shortly before my return, in an attempt to secure payment for an entire year's worth of work. This landscaper's cunning manipulation could be the subject of a separate tale. With my lawn left unattended, the homeowners association went berserk and bombarded me with a barrage of fines, hoping to exploit my absence. Their motive remained a mystery, and their attempts to contact me through futile means grew increasingly bizarre. When I finally arrived home, I was met with chaos, realizing I had to collect my mail from the local post office. The situation had spiraled out of control. Imagine my shock as I stepped out of the cab, eager to unlock my front door, only to discover that my keys no longer worked. To make matters worse, a for sale sign adorned my once beloved lawn. The midnight hour offered no solace, leaving me stranded and at a loss for what to do. Fortunately, a friend of mine, who happened to be awake, provided me refuge on his couch until I could gather my wits and devise a plan. At that moment, I suspected the bank might be responsible, and thus, my first destination was set. To my surprise, the bank claimed no knowledge of my house being listed for sale. With desperation mounting, I began asking around, searching for anyone with information about this bewildering turn of events. It was during this quest that I confronted the head of the Homeowners Association, who nonchalantly recounted the entire sordid tale of fines and the subsequent placing of a lien on my property. She audaciously declared that if I wasn't present to care for my home, the Homeowners Association legally owned it and could do as they pleased. Utterly dumbfounded, I resolved to find a lawyer immediately. Engaging a competent attorney confirmed what I already suspected. The property was undeniably mine, and the Homeowners Association had no rightful claim to it. Their only recourse would have been taking me to court for the fines, which of course was an impossibility given my prolonged absence. I decided to fight back, determined to pursue every last cent I could from those who had brazenly attempted to steal my home. Though I possessed limited legal knowledge, I understood that seizing an entire house was a grave offense. Throughout this tumultuous period, my steadfast friend provided unwavering support, offering me a place to stay and easing my burdens with his unwavering friendship. From that point forward, every taco he ever ate would be my treat, a small token of gratitude for his kindness during my darkest hours. Finally, the day arrived when we presented our case before a judge, armed with extensive documentation that proved my consistent mortgage payments and my complete obliviousness to the unfolding disaster until I returned home to discover my sanctuary up for sale. Judging by the judge's facial expressions, I sensed a shared outrage, albeit veiled behind a professional demeanor. The Homeowners Association's attorney attempted to justify their actions by claiming they acted in the neighborhood's best interests, asserting that an unattended property could be assumed abandoned and sold. However, no one bought their far-fetched story. In the end, justice prevailed. The Homeowners Association was ordered to repay every cent of my mortgage payments, compensating me for the pain and suffering I endured, as well as covering my moving expenses. Furthermore, every fine they had unjustly imposed was dismissed. The Homeowners Association faced a staggering loss of $475,000, and although they still existed in name, their influence dwindled as the funds evaporated. Once personal profit ceased to be an incentive, the so-called very concerned citizens suddenly lost interest. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This is a story about being a good neighbor, an homeowners association that actually isn't evil, and a towing company that is. This literally just concluded moments ago. I live in a little gated community with townhomes and stuff and an homeowners association. Nothing super fancy by any means, just a quiet little neighborhood. The way it works with parking and the crux of this story is that every resident has 2 spots assigned to their unit, and they're yours to do with as you see fit. Use them, leave them empty, let your neighbor use them, let guests use them, park straddling both spots, who cares? They're yours. It's been this way for many years with nary an issue. We have a towing company contracted to the Homeowners Association. Now our tow company is only here to be called at a residence or homeowners association. Direct request to remove an unauthorized vehicle from their spot. The parking is numbered, but just to identify the spots saved for residents. Everyone gets 2, as we don't have any numbered, assigned window stickers or anything that serious. The towing contract is rarely used, and really even then just as a last resort. We usually just talk to each other like good neighbors do if we have a parking or other issue. So I get home this evening and right behind me comes a tow truck, the kind they use for stealth pulls where they lift up one axle and roll you down the road about 20 seconds after arrival. As I get out of my car, I see them pulling a neighbor's car who always parks diagonally in their 2 spots, due to a tight configuration and a corner spot, making it difficult to navigate even small cars in and out while parking within the lines. Now again, it's their spots, so who cares? Literally nobody, that's who. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. You see, the couple that owns the car is a sweet little couple in their 60s, semi-retired, and generally just nice, quiet people. It didn't seem likely to me that their car was being repossessed, and something about the tow truck driver and his either spotter or manager, some random dude in an F-150 following him around on a radio, just made me feel odd. Usually I'm a pretty non-confrontational person, but something about the whole situation made me act in an uncharacteristically assertive manner, and so I flagged down the driver as he was beginning to leave with the resident's car. I'll be G, he'll be TT for tow truck. G. Hey, are you pulling a repo or a resident out of their own spot? TT. I'm pulling a resident for parking in 2 spots. G. That's bullcrap. I've lived here a decade, and that's never been a thing. TT. Yeah, well, it's in the contract. You should try reading it. G. No, I've literally talked to the Homeowners Association about exactly this, and they have confirmed what you're towing them for is explicitly not a towable thing unless the resident themselves called it in, and I doubt they asked you to tow their own car. TT. Well, you should talk to them then, because I'm leaving with it. G. Cool, see you in an hour. So, in comes the malicious compliance revenge. In a stroke of righteous karma, the Homeowners Association rep who is responsible for the tow company contract of our complex got home less than 5 minutes after the tow truck left, and I was out walking my dogs. I walked up to him, exchanged the usual pleasantries, and relayed the situation as well as the fact that they had tagged at least 3 other vehicles in the immediate vicinity for future tows. He simply let out an exasperated, "Ugh, crap," and said he would get on it. I then knocked on the neighbor's door whose car got towed and informed them of the situation as it stood, suggesting they also contact the Homeowners Association rep up the hill. They did so accordingly, and he confirmed that he was already in the process of handling it. We stood out front and chatted for a bit, and he went inside. I retreated to my front porch and waited for what I knew was coming. 20 minutes later, as I leaned against the wall out front, I heard the jingle-jangle of victory coming back into the complex. The tow truck drops the car diagonally in both spots just as he found it, with a scowl on his face. As he leaves, we make eye contact. I grin. He gives me the finger as he leaves. I smile because he knows I won. The neighbor whose car was again parked came outside shortly thereafter, and we chatted again briefly. The Homeowners Association rep, whose swift action ensured their car was back in the spot exactly 1 hour from the time it was towed, came down to where we were chatting and apologized for the issue, saying that the towing company has given them other problems recently, and that with this he would be moving at next month's board meeting to contract with a new company as of January 1st, one that actually abides by what we pay them to do, which definitely isn't towing ourselves. In closing, be the good neighbor Mr. Rogers taught you to be. The next one is a petty revenge story. I had an investment account at my bank that I set up in order to save for my kids' college and used it to pay tuition. About 2 years after the last one graduated, I realized that I'd been getting a monthly statement for the account, even though it only had $280 in it. So I went to the bank to close it out and have the $280 transferred to my checking account. They sent me to an investment specialist in a small office off to the side since customer service people can't do anything with investment accounts. I want to state that the person I sat down with was doing his job, and he had rules and procedures to follow. He started out nice and friendly. When he asked why I wanted to close the account, I explained to him that I was getting monthly statements. It was costing the bank money, etc. However, he told me there would be a $135 fee to close out the account. I asked if it could be waived since it was half the value of the account. It was costing the bank to send the statements, and he got irritated with me for even suggesting such a thing. Then he spent the next 15 minutes trying to sell me life insurance, asking how much I had in my other accounts, and that he could probably do better performance-wise if I transferred it all to his investment branch. Cue petty revenge. I decided not to close out the account, but to take out $279 instead, leaving $1 in it. In a now condescending tone, he lectured me that it wouldn't stop the monthly statements, the reason I wanted to close the account. I explained to him that it wasn't worth $135 to me to stop the mail. 2 years later, I'm still getting monthly statements for the account that now has $1.03 in it. The next one is a petty revenge story. I used to work in a role where I administered the security access card system for a huge office. An obnoxious colleague used to take a shortcut from the lobby through a meeting room and out the other side to his desk. However, in doing so, he would leave the meeting room's entrance door open, which would sound an alarm once he had left the area. I sat in the lobby near the door he left open, and I was the one who had to get up and close it for him. He didn't respond to polite requests to stop, so I disabled his access pass, but only on the second door, which is closest to his desk. He would walk through the meeting room, get 6 feet from his desk, and be declined by the door. This caused him to have to walk back to me to ask if something was wrong with his access. I'd ask him to close the shortcut door he'd opened, alarm now sounding, and he always did. Then, I'd act confused and say, "Why don't you try it on that other door over there?" and direct him to the proper entrance to the office area, which had a mysterious 100% success rate for letting him through. I simulated an intermittent technical error by deactivating his card, and then reactivating it for well over 12 months, and I acted dumb any time he questioned it. I've asked ICT about it, but nobody knows, mate. Who knows how these systems work? Sometimes he would forget his personal pass, and I'd issue him a visitor pass and disable that on his shortcut too, which added an extra layer of obfuscation. Sometimes I'd allow him to use his shortcut, and I'd happily close the door behind him, knowing that it was all part of his education. Eventually, he learned that it was always quicker to walk straight to the proper entrance, and he stopped taking the shortcut and stopped leaving the alarmed door near me open. He never found out that I trained him. The next one is an entitled parent story. A few years ago, I lived in a house that was a block away from a public park. It was a very large park, and I noticed 2 soccer games occurring when I left one Saturday to go to the grocery store. When I returned home about 45 minutes later, I noticed there was a truck parked beside my property. The occupants of that truck were on my property. There were 2 children dressed in soccer uniforms, their mom and dad, and a large Doberman. The Doberman was lying on a picnic blanket. The parents were setting up their family's picnic lunch, and the children were chasing each other, all on my front lawn. I couldn't believe my eyes. I pulled my car into my driveway and walked over to the family, asking them why they were on my property. The entitled mother then snarked at me, "What does it look like? We are eating lunch." I asked why they were not eating in the public park that is a block away, and she responded, "It's more peaceful here." In complete shock, I then said, "This is private property, and you all need to leave now." The mother's response was, "Go F yourself, you little bee." I was furious. I pay the mortgage, I do all the lawn work, and you think it's okay to trespass and tell me where to go on my own property? So this was the easiest revenge ever. I walked right beside them to the outside tap that was attached to my sprinkler system and turned it on. The family started screaming and grabbed all their stuff as they ran to their truck. The mother and father screamed obscenities the whole time and said that they were going to get me. Well, this is where revenge number 2 came in. I downloaded my security camera footage, which showed their license plate, and brought it to my next-door neighbor, who just happened to be a police officer working that day. The parents were charged with trespassing, and I had a smile on my face for the rest of the day. The next one is an entitled parent story. Backstory. For the last few years, I, 29, have been developing vitiligo all over my body, which has become very noticeable on my hands. For those who do not know, vitiligo is a skin condition in which white blood cells attack the melanin pigment in your skin, causing the loss of skin color. I have natural tan skin, resulting in white patches forming all over my hands that are very noticeable. My family, mainly my brother and dad, have mocked me for this skin condition multiple times. As a result, I have become self-conscious of my white spots and started wearing tattoo concealer to cover them up. The other day, I was heading out to work and forgot to put on the concealer. One of the places I go to is my local coffee shop before heading into work. While I was in line, a kid probably about 9, 10 years old came up to me and said, "Ew, what is wrong with your hands?" I ignored them at first because I found it rude. Though they were a child, my mom always raised me from a young age to never stare, point, or criticize people's conditions, especially since we never know how they may have gotten them. After ignoring them, they asked me again what was wrong with my hands. I relented and told them that I was uncomfortable talking about it and asked them not to ask me again. Then I turned back around. I know I could have used this as an educational moment, but I do not feel that it is my responsibility to educate others on how to be decent human beings or about my skin condition. The kid did not like my response, and at this point, the child's mother got involved. Dear reader, let me tell you what. I have always thought these stories of entitled parents and rude people were exaggerated and that no one could be this oblivious. However, after this interaction, my opinion of these stories has changed. She got my attention with that dreaded phrase, "Excuse me," and I knew I was in for a ride. The interaction went as follows. EM. My child asked you what was wrong with your hands. The least you could do is tell them what happened. Me. Ma'am, I'm not comfortable talking about it. I do not need to tell your child anything. EM. Well, why not? If you didn't want people to ask about your deformity, then you should wear a glove. Now I will ask again, what is wrong with your hand? Reddit. It was at this point that I saw red. However, keeping my emotions in check, I calmly said, I was in a terrible accident in which my hand was mangled. It was mangled so badly that I almost lost my hand altogether. Each white spot that you see is a scar from where bone, blood, muscle, tendons, etc. were on the outside of my hand. I lost lots of blood and almost died from the accident. I was lucky enough that my hand was saved, but it left me with scars. While this was all fabricated on the spot, I felt that being as graphic as I could might teach her and her child a lesson in leaving people alone, especially after they already told you that they did not feel comfortable talking about it in the first place. She honestly clutched her imaginary pearls as I recounted the story, and by the time I was done she was pale-faced. She then grabbed her child and quickly left the line. The next one is a choosing beggars story. So I'm not a small guy. Other than being slightly rotund, I'm fairly tall with most of my height coming from my legs. Long legs and short arms, FTW. As such, whenever I fly, I always pay for an upgraded seat. Those few extra inches of legroom save my knees from abuse from the seat ahead of me. One flight a few years back, I had managed to score an emergency exit row seat. Now, this airline, in order to satisfy emergency exit row space requirements, simply moved the row I was in back an inch or two, meaning the row directly behind had less than normal space. Important detail. Also, given my rotundness, I always get an aisle seat. I would take an aisle seat that had normal legroom over a middle seat that didn't. So I board the flight and get settled for the 6-hour-long domestic flight. I occupy myself watching the absolute clusterfuck of other people boarding. Does it really take that long to stow your crap and get in your seat? When I feel a tap on my shoulder. Sitting next to me is a mid-20s Karen. Karen asks me, would you mind switching seats with my BF so we can sit together? Now, I'm not a huge a-hole, most of the time, so I ask where the BF is sitting. Turns out he has the middle seat in the row behind us. Remember, it has less space than normal. I politely explained to Karen that there is no way I can deal with being in a middle seat for 6 hours after I explicitly paid for my upgraded seat. Now, all of this doesn't make this Karen a CB, but what does is her reaction. She proceeds to spend the next 20 minutes, all before we finally take off, trying to subtly guilt me into switching. She starts huffing and whining, turns around every few minutes to her BF and cries, "This is going to be the worst flight ever, Luckily, I'm immune to guilt. I know that all of this was just an act because the moment we took off and I could focus on my tablet, and she realized I wasn't paying her a lick of attention, she was immediately fine. The next one is a choosing beggars story. I work at a locally owned Mexican restaurant. The owners are two of the most kind, compassionate, and selfless people I've ever met. The reader board outside of the restaurant reads as follows: Hungry? No money? We will feed you. And they mean it. If you are hungry and have no money, you can eat for free. There are a couple of exceptions to this. 1. There is a limited menu available. 2. It must be to go. It's assumed if someone doesn't have money for food, they don't have money for a tip. That's not fair to the servers. Last week, a family of 4 came in saying they saw the sign and would like to order food. I gave them the limited menu to choose from. This is the conversation we had. CB: I don't see fajitas on here. I want shrimp fajitas. Me: the only free options available are what's on that menu, sir. CB: well, that's unfortunate. I don't like these options. Can you ask your boss if I can get fajitas? I had to text my boss. Surprise, surprise, he said no. Me: I'm sorry, he said he cannot do fajitas for free. He then rolled his eyes and looked at the menu again. CB: you guys need to expand the options on this menu, but I guess I'll take this, this, and this. I rang their order in and said I would bring it out to them when it's ready. CB: we want to eat here. We need a table. Me: I'm sorry, we only do to-go orders on the free items. CB: that's not going to work for us. We want to eat here. Me: I'm sorry, but our policy is if you order off the free menu, you can only take it. Then this guy has the nerve to cut me off by raising his hand up in the air. He then herds his family to the closest booth and sits down. I follow and explain the policy again. I told them if they want to dine in, that's fine. I would cancel their free order and they can pay for their food. This got them out of the booth. The guy then demanded he speak to the owner. I again tell him he's not available. I give him a business card instead. He actually says thanks for nothing after I hand him $50 worth of free food. This individual actually left us a 1-star review on Yelp. The nerve of some people astonishes me. The next one is an entitled people story. The housing market in our area had been in a slump for quite some time, leaving the house next to mine vacant for what felt like an eternity. It was no surprise that eventually, people would find a way to make use of the abandoned property. To my initial astonishment, these squatters didn't fit the stereotypical image that had been ingrained in my mind by TV dramas. They appeared like ordinary neighbors, dressed cleanly and engaging in conversations with everyone. I never suspected a thing until their neglect of the property became glaringly apparent. As time passed, the signs of their squatting became more evident. Their disregard for maintaining the house became noticeable, and they even approached me once, requesting to borrow my hose, which made me realize they didn't have access to water. Still, I adhered to the principle of minding my own business when it didn't directly affect me. Compared to other neighbors, they weren't the worst, and at least they seemed to be maintaining their personal hygiene and clothing. However, things started spiraling downward once they acquired a car. I couldn't fathom how they managed to afford it, nor did I want to delve into the murky details. The revelation of their ownership came about in the most bewildering way. One morning at the crack of dawn, I stumbled out of my house, half awake, preparing for another day of work. As I tried to back out of my garage, I discovered an obstruction of the most peculiar kind. Their car was parked diagonally, with half of it on my property and the other half jutting out onto the curb. It was an illegal parking job, rendering any chance of maneuvering impossible. The car was unfamiliar to me, and I wasn't inclined to go door to door at such an ungodly hour to inquire about it. My initial assumption was that someone had a drunken guest who parked irresponsibly or was simply incapable of driving. Regardless, I had no choice but to summon a tow truck, considering the vehicle was on my property without permission. Regrettably, this ordeal resulted in me being an hour late for work, leaving my boss less than thrilled. In my frazzled state, I failed to capture any photographic evidence to justify my tardiness. The following day, which happened to be a weekend, I was unexpectedly home. Suddenly, a series of aggressive knocks on my door shook the tranquility, causing my cat to leap in fright and scurry away. Something instinctive told me that trouble had arrived, even before I caught sight of my irate squatter neighbors through the peephole. Without giving me a chance to react, the man erupted in anger the moment he laid eyes on me. Squatter. "What the hell happened to my car?" Me. "Your car was—" He rudely cut me off, unwilling to let me explain. Squatter. "I know it was right here. I returned yesterday and poof, it disappeared." Me. "Yes, I did see your car in the morning when—" Once again he interrupted me, failing to let me complete a sentence. Squatter. "See, that's precisely why I left it here. I assumed you'd keep an eye on it and now it's vanished." Me. "Please, let me finish. Your car was blocking my garage, preventing me from leaving for work. So, I had no choice but to call a tow company to remove it since it was illegally parked and trapping me." Squatter. "Why didn't you simply inform me?" Me. "I'd never seen this car before, so I had no way of knowing it belonged to you. If you contact the tow company, they likely still have your car, and you can retrieve it." The man, however, harbored delusions of entitlement, demanding that I cover the fees associated with reclaiming his car. I staunchly refused, which further fueled his rage. His presumed wife stood silently beside him, observing the spectacle. Little did they know my porch camera had captured their entire verbal assault, providing digital evidence of their illegal occupation. In addition, I had shared the information about these disruptive squatters with other neighbors, amplifying the complaints lodged against them. With my video evidence and their multiple infringements, the sheriff's department was soon involved, escorting them off the property. The fate of their car remained unknown to me, but I fervently wished that this outcome awaited all troublesome neighbors in similar stories. Had the man not displayed such erratic behavior, he might have continued living next door undetected for an extended period before eventually being ousted. The audacity he displayed by blocking me in and then demanding compensation for his own misdeeds rendered any empathy or leniency null and void. They would likely move on to squat elsewhere, and my only hope was that they wouldn't inflict their disruptive presence on any more innocent individuals. While I empathize with the hardships faced by many, resorting to illegal means and antagonizing neighbors surely wasn't the solution. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I used to work for a married couple, Billy, M52, and Gigi, F44, who owned a business services and public relations agency. It lasted more or less for a year. They seemed nice and humble, but in reality they were shady and untruthful. The company began to falter because of poor management and zero intention to prioritize. Billy was your baby-faced next-door neighbor type. He looked about 10 years younger and had a kind smile. He was soft-spoken and had an artistic and creative flair to him. Gigi looked matronly with a Mother Earth incarnate attitude towards her children. She prided herself on being ruthless when it came to giving her family only the best. She could be really nice when she wanted to, but I found out early on that she was 100% adept at gossip and being two-faced. The company's constant changes were a red flag. They went from business services plus PR agency to an IT provider to a business incubator to indie beer partners. What I'm trying to say is that they tried to dip their donut in everyone's coffee, figuratively. Some of us had no real way to escape. The lady working next to me was already 67 years old and scared that no one would hire her. I wasn't in a great place either. We were 8 employees in total. They wouldn't lay anyone off because they believed that the employees should quit. They paid us only a portion of our salaries, incomplete weekly payments. Employees would run for the hills once they found a better job. Some of us were stuck. It was horrible. Then, they would pay the normal rate for a month and then do it again. They never cut down on their luxury expenses, so the wife would post her shopping sprees or arrive in a new car like it was nothing. Zero empathy. Very insensitive. The husband was obsessed with making it big time. So much so that he sometimes failed to see an opportunity right in front of him. He said he was Coca-Cola's brand manager. I swear I looked it up and could never find any reference. Gigi had a display full of small local magazines, mostly about design and architecture. They were very proud to be a team member, but in reality, they just helped them print 2 issues. They wanted big business only, but in the meantime, looked down upon tangible potential clients. Like the young Latino couple who showed up trying to learn more about their services. They seemed lost because they wanted someone to help them set up a coffee business and had no idea how it was done. I talked to them and helped them into the waiting room. They even showed up with their baby in a stroller. That means they must have driven by and decided to come in. An impulsive client should be retained. The guy said his grandpa had a farm, and he wanted to create an import/exports company. Once Billy showed up, he listened for a bit, then kind of gave them a sort of abrupt dismissal. That was a dick move, because that couple opened their own business with someone else and even have a FB page. It could have been Billy. Billy lined his office walls with posters of Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. His wife, the chief enabling officer, put up signs on each room. The main employee area was the machine room. Billy's office was the chamber. The conference room was a meeting of the minds. Every time an employee disagreed with Billy during a brainstorming session, Gigi would call them aside and tell them that Billy is your boss. You need to know that he is brilliant and a genius. I want him to have that taste of success. I experienced that firsthand. I also hated brainstorming because that was never in my job description. They just wanted to pick everyone's brains. In the meantime, we had to see the Pandora jewelry, the expensive makeovers for their daughters, and the weekend at the spa updates on FB. Gigi's captions were usually about rewarding herself after a hard week or because she deserved it. Oh, and I'd like to mention that they bought into the social guru phrases about emotional direction. So if an employee ever got angry, Gigi would tell you, remember the one who gets angry is the one who ends up losing. For anyone who's been in this situation, you may understand how painful it can be. You cannot leave the job because you have no other job waiting for you. And pathetic as it may sound to some income is better than no income at all. This is an involuntary compromise and it's abusive. Why were we expected to pay for their luxuries via incomplete wages? My best friend's ex is into coding and programming and he agreed to help. If it didn't work out, at least we would have something to laugh about. We created a kick-ass fake website with a matching LinkedIn and the whole 9 yards. To make a long story short, this was supposed to be an investment company, and my friend would be very casual, nothing too eager. He started by liking my employer's FB page, then comment. Before we knew it, my boss took the bait and was engaging. They exchanged emails, and he was eager to share all his projects and ambitious crap. On the other side, the investor sent him a list of requirements like proof of concept, employer payroll, EIN hash, etc. The investor agreed to work with them if they could prove they were legit and up to date. No bank account or confidential info was asked. Within 3 weeks, I was paid the equivalent of the 2 months and a half I was owed. The investor did an about-face and never contacted him again. I left the job as soon as I could. My friend, who remained until she got paid, told me our boss seemed off and a bit down after he announced big things are coming, but it all seemed to deflate. I never disclosed what was really going on. The next one is a petty revenge story. My granddad used to own a piece of land next to a horse racetrack. Their land almost surrounded my granddad's, except for him having access to a heavily trafficked public road. The racetrack was laid out in such a way that their exercise track was placed north of my granddad's land, while the main track with the stadium was placed to the south. Way back when the racetrack was built, they had asked my granddad if they could transport their horses across his land. There was already a maintenance road in place, and as they only moved their horses, he didn't really mind, as they also supported the local village. As a small thank you for this, they allowed him and his guests to watch the races for free. Normally, it cost around $5 in our local currency. Not that much. But it allowed him to take me and all my cousins to watch the horses for free. Anyhow, fast forward a couple of years, and my granddad passed away. My mother, who inherited the land, tried to bring her grandchild, my niece, to the racetrack to see the horses just as my granddad used to do. At the counter, she is told that she has to pay for admission, not really that big of a deal, as she thought that they didn't know that she now owned the land. However, when she writes to the track to rectify the situation, they tell her that she won't receive admission free, as it was a one-time deal they had struck with my granddad that was now off. Enter the petty revenge. A few months later, when we had planned to cut down some of the trees for lumber, my mother told the contractors to accidentally leave 1 or 2 logs across the maintenance road. The racetrack, now having to load their horses on trolleys as they had to use the busy public road instead of our maintenance one, almost immediately sent an email to my mother apologizing and offering her the same deal as my granddad had received if we would remove the logs. She only informed them that the one-time deal they had struck with my granddad was off. In the end, after some wrangling, we ended up with a deal where they now have to pay my mother around $400 every month, in addition to her and her guests having free admission. The next one is a malicious compliance story. At the beginning of the COVID lockdown, the company that I work for put out a notice to all clients that we would not be doing occupied repairs unless it was an emergency. Less than a week into the lockdown, one of our clients decides that our notice does not apply to them. They call us to do an occupied repair for a hole in the wall with a side note to retrieve the baseball inside. The following morning, I checked in at the leasing office and tried to give as little information as possible regarding where the hole was and any details about what I was about to encounter. I was told that they wanted the ball back because it was autographed and very valuable. Their kid was playing with it in the apartment. I was also informed to try and keep it to a minimum because the resident was paying for the repair. I wish they had told me how difficult the resident was going to be. I went to the apartment, introduced myself to the resident, and was greeted with, "What, they couldn't find a Mexican to fix my wall? They sent the cracker to make my home look like crap." I tried to assure her that I could fix the wall, but she just slammed the door in my face. I returned to the leasing office and explained to the assistant maintenance supervisor, AMS, what had just happened. He just said, "Here we go again. Let's go, I'll talk to her." We both went back to the apartment and the AMS told her that I'm more than capable of fixing the wall and he personally requested me to do the job. She let us in with a look of disapproval. I started the job by spreading out a drop cloth and plastic and cutting out the already baseball-sized hole bigger, so I could see and feel around for the ball. That's when I determined that the wall was a staggered wall and I wouldn't be able to find it. For those who don't know, a staggered wall is 2 walls built with an inch of space between them, used for muffling noises and often used to hide plumbing. I told the AMS that she really wanted that ball, and I was going to need to open the wall even more. He went to talk to the resident, and all I heard was her yelling, "I don't give a damn if he has to open the entire wall. I want that ducking ball." The AMS came back and motioned for me to take a step outside while he made a phone call. A minute later, my boss called me, telling me when I get the okay, do whatever I need to find the ball and keep track of my time. At that point, I realized I was going to open up a wall just to find a ball. The property manager showed up with a paper in hand and had the resident sign it, then turned to me and said, "Go for it." I began taking out the lower half, pulling out the insulation, looking high and low. About 1.5 hours later, we found it in the insulation wedged between the plumbing and a stud of the neighboring wall. The AMS let the resident know we found it, and she went to collect the baseball, freaking out. The AMS reminded her that she didn't give a damn if I had to open the entire wall. Needless to say, I closed up the wall, not leaving any signs of it ever being opened. The paper the property manager had her sign was to ensure the resident would cover all costs. So what should have been a $200 job turned into a $1,000 job, and the autographed baseball turned out to be worth less than expected. The autographs were from college players who didn't go pro. Hopefully, she learned something from this. The next one is an entitled people story. I recently posted about my estranged sister who had not been in contact with our father in the past 6 years, and me. Her ex-husband and I were both trying to get access to their son's college funds set up by my father prior to the family even having his funeral. My estranged sister was only married to her son's father for just over 4 years. The son's father was nearly 10 years older than my sister and had a tween-age daughter, Bree, when they got married. Bree hated my sister. She really wanted her parents to get back together, even though her mother had married someone else. She thought my sister was keeping her parents from reconciling. I believe that during the 4 years, Bree only saw my parents a handful of times, at most 4, 6 times. My sister and Bree's father divorced either just before or right after Bree's 16th birthday. After the divorce, none of the family had contact with Bree or heard anything from her until she started college. Around the time she started college, she contacted me to inquire if my parents had a college fund for her. She remembered that my sister mentioned our parents set one up for her half-brother, so she thought they would have one for her too. I informed her that they only set up college funds for their actual grandchildren, not any of the step-grandchildren. Unfortunately, between my two sisters, there have been a lot of step-grandchildren who have come and gone over the years. Anyway, on to recent events. No one in our family has heard anything from Bree in about 10 years now. Apparently, Bree's father told her about our dad's passing, so I received a message from Bree. She said, "I heard your father died. Did he leave me anything? I am getting married later this year and I could really use the money to help pay for my wedding." There were no condolences, no "sorry to hear about his passing," just straight to "did he leave me anything?" When I received her message, I had not even received the official death certificate from the state, which is necessary to begin dealing with any of the estate issues. I have heard stories about greedy people who show up out of nowhere when they think there might be an inheritance or something. But I am still amazed by the way some people behave. I also fear that this will not be the only inquiry about possible inheritance I am going to receive. The next one is an entitled parent story. I'm a 25-year-old male and married to a 26-year-old woman named Carol. Her mother, Danielle, who is 61, is a complete bag of garbage, and that's the nicest thing to say. During Carol's childhood, Danielle would always belittle Carol and manipulate her into the most absurd stuff, often claiming that her father abandoned them in Colorado to seek fame and fortune in California, and refusing to pay child support. In reality, she would spend the child support on herself, buying books and clothes instead of supporting her daughter. Danielle even changed Carol's last name on her Social Security to match Danielle's last name when Carol was a little kid. This made it incredibly difficult for Carol to find a job as an adult because she was considered an illegal alien by the U.S. government. Her birth certificate had one last name, while her Social Security card had a different last name. Danielle also had a low-paying job and had to get an apartment under Carol's name due to Danielle's poor credit history. Carol had a credit score of 0 because she was only 18 at the time and didn't have her own bills to pay. Despite Danielle constantly pressuring Carol to get a job, Carol couldn't do so because of the name issue. Eventually, they were evicted for failing to pay rent because Danielle's job couldn't cover the expenses of a luxury apartment, and they had to move in with Carol's grandma. Later, Danielle lost her job during the COVID-19 pandemic and has been unemployed since then. There are many more instances of Danielle taking advantage of her own daughter, but I won't bore you with all the details. Now, on to the story. In late 2021, while Carol and I were engaged, she decided to join the U.S. Navy. She legally changed her name on the Social Security card to match her birth certificate and provided her recruiter with child custody papers as proof. She enlisted, completed basic training, finished her A-schooling, and received orders to serve on a ship. We got married in September 2022 before she was deployed to Virginia for her new assignment. While Carol was serving in the Navy, I packed my belongings to move to Virginia myself. During that time, I learned that Danielle was going to therapy, possibly to move on from her past behavior. I tried my best to avoid her, but she kept pestering me, wondering why Carol wasn't communicating with her during the day. I repeatedly informed her that Carol didn't have cell service on her ship, but it seemed to go in one ear and out the other. Finally, in December 2022, I arrived in Virginia to be with Carol. We had been ignoring Danielle's calls for a while. Fast forward to April. Carol received a text from Danielle asking her to call and talk. They had a lengthy conversation, during which Carol learned that her grandma's health was deteriorating. Around the same time, I received my brother's high school graduation invitation in the mail, and I wanted to attend his graduation in May. Carol also wanted to see her grandma, because she was concerned that her grandma might not make it to the end of 2023. Danielle seemed unusually nice, and both Carol and I thought she had changed because of the therapy she had been receiving. So, last week we flew back to Colorado and Danielle lent us her car while we were there. She continued being overly nice to us, behaving like a decent human being. We witnessed my brother's graduation ceremony, and Carol got to see her grandma. During our visit, we discovered that Carol's grandma wanted to move to a safer place with Carol's aunt due to her declining health. Additionally, Danielle had to find another place to live because, in her eyes, nobody wants to take me in because the family doesn't like me. We explained that we couldn't help her because we were living in a small 650-square-foot, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the country. Once again, Danielle became even nicer to us while we were still in Colorado. I even warned Carol that her mother's sudden kindness could lead to something negative in the future, considering her history. Carol agreed. A few days after we returned to Virginia, Carol received a text from Danielle stating that she would have to live in her car because nobody would help her. Carol asked why she couldn't get a job and find her own apartment. Danielle responded, "I can't get a job at my age. It's been too long, and it's very expensive to live on your own, especially in Colorado." Carol explained that we unfortunately couldn't assist her because firstly, we lived in a small apartment, and secondly, we resided 7 states away. And that brings us to today. I'm at work, and Carol called saying she needs to be with me. I asked if everything was okay because it was evident that something was wrong. She said she would explain when she arrived. 30 minutes later, she showed up, and I took my lunch break with her. She told me that her mom had actually asked for $1,000 to move from Colorado to Virginia, so she could be with us. $1,000. We had informed her multiple times that we couldn't help because we didn't have the space, let alone the $1,000 to spare as we lived paycheck to paycheck. I was shocked. Carol mentioned that her mom's recent excessive niceness had seemed too good to be true, just as I had suspected. Either she didn't receive the necessary therapy or she had been lying. There was no way to confirm the truth. I wasn't present for this part, but Carol and Danielle argued over the phone, resorting to exchanging profanities. Danielle was upset with Carol for not providing a home for her, even though she had done it for Carol for the first 20 years of her life. Carol ended the call by telling her mother, "Just leave us alone," before blocking her completely. Danielle is now homeless, living in her Nissan Sentra, but we couldn't care less. All those years Carol endured due to Danielle's entitled and narcissistic behavior are now catching up with her. Nobody wants to help her because she only cares about herself and knows what she's doing is wrong but doesn't give a damn. Personally, I don't care if she dies. When that happens, I'll piss on her grave. The next one is an entitled people story. The day I first moved into my house was one of great pride and triumph. My journey to homeownership had been a long and arduous one, driven by the memory of my hard-working mother and her dream of owning a home. As a single mother, she had faced countless challenges, struggling to make ends meet while providing for me. When she passed away, I vowed to fulfill her dream, working relentlessly to achieve that goal. After carefully considering various options, I finally found the perfect house situated slightly away from the town's bustling center. Its spacious yard and garage were ideal for my passion for restoring classic cars. Over the years, I diligently worked to expand my collection, with the crown jewel being the first car I had lovingly restored, a 1969 Dodge Charger, a cherished relic that held deep sentimental value. As time went by, the neighborhood underwent a transformation. Many original residents moved away, making room for new faces, and thus a homeowners association was formed. Although I never desired to be part of it, the association insisted that their rules applied to everyone, including me. Unfortunately, the homeowners association president Marley had an insatiable thirst for power, imposing exorbitant fines for minor infractions in a shameless money-making scheme. Nonetheless, my dedication and hard work paid off, not only in my professional life, but also in my personal pursuits. My garage became a treasure trove of vintage cars, a testament to my unwavering passion. However, as the garage reached its capacity, my neighbor Jeffrey suggested I park the cherished Charger in my front yard. His own car was parked in a similar fashion due to the lack of a garage. He assured me that as long as it wasn't obstructing the sidewalk, no one would object. Finding no alternative, I followed his advice, placing the Charger in the front yard. Its presence offered solace, a connection to my late mother and her undying spirit, yet Marley couldn't resist exerting his authority. In no time, I received a letter claiming the car was an eyesore and marred the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal. Undeterred, I discarded the letter, refusing to let anyone dictate the fate of my beloved Charger. As Marley's rule persisted, the neighborhood endured a cascade of departures. His behavior grew increasingly erratic, drowning his sorrows in alcohol and wreaking havoc with his reckless driving. Jeffrey informed me that Marley's wife had left him, adding to the growing list of residents fleeing his oppressive reign. It seemed as though his self-inflicted demise was imminent. One fateful night, I was awakened by a thunderous crash, a cacophony that shook me to my core. Little did I know the horrifying truth that awaited me. As I stumbled outside, a nightmarish scene unfolded before my eyes. The remnants of my once pristine Charger lay in ruins. Shocked and devastated, I stood frozen, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the destruction. Jeffrey, too, was appalled by the sight, questioning what had happened. With a sinking feeling, I knew in my heart that Marley had deliberately demolished my car. Determined to confront him, I stormed to his doorstep, demanding answers. Predictably, he feigned innocence, claiming ignorance and asserting he had been asleep all night. Refusing to accept his lies, I insisted on reviewing the security camera footage installed by the Homeowners Association throughout the neighborhood. To my dismay, the system reported that the cameras had mysteriously been turned off for the past 2 weeks. Anger and despair consumed me as I filed a complaint with the police, though the lack of evidence hindered their ability to take immediate action. Just when despair threatened to engulf me, Jeffrey arrived at my doorstep, clutching a lifeline. His car's dashcam had inadvertently recorded the entire ordeal, the bulldozer mercilessly crashing into my Charger. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, we wasted no time in pursuing legal action against Marley. The bulldozer's license plate linked back to him, exposing his despicable act of vengeance. In court, Marley's arrogance and deceit crumbled under the weight of undeniable proof. The judge ruled decisively in my favor, ordering Marley to pay a staggering $150,000 in damages. Justice prevailed, but the aftermath was even more satisfying. Marley's world crumbled as his wife left him, forcing him to abandon the neighborhood he had ruled with an iron fist. Jeffrey, a trusted neighbor, assumed the position of Homeowners Association president, earning the community's overwhelming support. Though the wreckage of my Charger could never be fully restored, the compensation I received allowed me to find solace in a new beginning. With the funds, I embarked on a mission to locate and acquire another Dodge Charger. Although it required meticulous repair and the salvaging of usable parts from the wreckage, I breathed life into this new acquisition. It could never replace the sentimental value of the original, but its resurrection served as a testament to my resilience and unyielding spirit. In the end, the tyrannical reign of Marley crumbled, replaced by a neighbor who genuinely cared for the community's well-being. And as the new Charger roared to life, its engine a symphony of triumph, I vowed to carry on my mother's legacy, creating new memories and cherishing the dreams she had passed on to me. The next one is a pro-revenge story. In college, my two friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried, and the thermostat was upstairs. Then the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money, aka Taco Bell and cheap tequila. She would scream at whatever guy she was sleeping with to bring her meth, and one day she brought home 3 puppies to scream at too. We were terrified of this woman and the noise was hell. Also, we'd been idiotic enough to sign a lease stating we were responsible for all utilities, period, meaning we were now financing her gas, water, and electricity. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then she started smoking, constantly. According to the landlord, she'd quit for good when she'd signed the lease, but for good only lasted 2 days. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7, and the smoke was wafting up from the vents. Our apartment and all our belongings began to reek of smoke. We contacted the landlord because we'd signed for a bloody non-smoking apartment. He told us we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. Duck you, leasing laws. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation. They were online students while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat because my idiotic stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane. I made a plan. I checked the forecast, lows in the 20s all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag. I bought one of those ski masks with the holes for your eyes and mouth. I got out my stocking cap, my silk-long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen and prepared to live off a diet of hot liquids, and I turned off the ducking heat. Day 1. She's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen crap hole of an apartment. Day 2. She's screaming at her boyfriend, meth dealer, because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3. She's screaming at the landlord about how she's ducking freezing. Day 4. The landlord is at my door. I greet him in full ski mask / parka / stocking cap array, looking like I'm heading out to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asks me if I don't find it a little chilly in the house. I reply I'd found all the cigarette smoke a little warm. Day 5. She's screaming about the idiots upstairs to anyone who will listen. And I'm sitting upstairs clutching my car keys and my pepper spray with 911 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's ducking leaving and moving in with Greg, even though he just got out for stabbing Travis, and he lives in that ducking creepy house in the woods with all those a-hole biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. Moral of the story, there's a bloody reason the rent seems too good to be true. The next one is a petty revenge story. My neighbors have 9 cars in total parked on the street. They always park 2 of those cars in front of my house and won't move them for the entire week. We have a regulation where I live that states you can't leave your car parked for more than 48 hours in the same spot. My neighbors have a pretty big driveway where they can fit 4 cars, but it's always empty. They have told me they don't like to leave their driveway with cars because it looks tacky. Over half of the cars they have, they don't even use. They just use them to save parking spots for themselves. In 2021, I noticed they were building a second unit behind their main house. I noticed that they completed the house in under a month. This raised some red flags because it takes anywhere from 2-3 months, with city inspections taking the majority of the time. I submitted a ticket with my city through the app and advised them that there might be some illegal residential building without permits. I didn't think much of it until a year later. I noticed my neighbors tearing down their second unit last week. Word got around our block that a city inspector was there making sure everything was being torn down. Based on the materials and labor they put into their second unit, it must have cost them over $100,000. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Years ago, I was a low-level IT manager at a major media company. My team was understaffed with too many projects to handle and no IT tester to test our apps. Consequently, the programmers, the product owner, a non-technical member from the business side, and I had to test the apps ourselves. The IT director, my boss, never assisted with these issues due to budget constraints. It was widely known that the company had been facing major financial problems for years. It was challenging, but we managed to take care of our apps adequately. Our primary project involved redesigning our sports news app, which generated substantial revenue through mobile ads. The app was over 8 years old and worked like a very old car. Thus, we decided to build it from scratch. However, progress was slow since we also had to update and fix numerous other apps, and we were essentially operating with a skeleton crew. The problems began when the product owner left and was replaced by someone who, in my opinion, was completely unsuitable for the role. This individual displayed a lack of concern for the product, the users, and her colleagues. Her only priority was to please her boss, a business director. She was essentially an ideal yes man. Moreover, she was lazy and lacked any genuine experience or knowledge in mobile app development. She never undertook any significant tasks that the former product owner had handled. Her activities mainly involved organizing and attending meetings, drinking coffee, and idling away time on the internet. This wasn't a major issue for me since I performed my job well and everything was progressing as planned. Furthermore, her behavior was somewhat acceptable. However, the crucial point is that she never tested the app, nor did she have any interest in understanding it. In fact, I can't recall ever seeing her use any of our apps. One day, she informed us about an internal deadline for completing our app, which was set for February 1st, nearly a full year later. However, this deadline was merely for budgeting purposes, and wasn't particularly significant for in-house projects in any sensible company. We explained to her that given our responsibilities and the shortage of programmers, the chances of completing every planned function were close to zero. However, we suggested releasing a basic version of the app, without certain features, to a small portion of the users, perhaps around 1%. Later, we could update the app with the missing features and gradually increase the user base to 100%. She approved of this solution, and the entire team was informed of our plan. Thus, we continued our work as before, developing the new app while also tending to other apps, providing weekly progress updates on the new app. Fast forward to November during a short vacation I took. Upon my return, I discovered that the new product owner was furious with our progress, even though everything was proceeding according to plan. During my absence, she had informed our bosses that we were in crisis mode because the app wouldn't be ready by February 1st, placing the blame squarely on us, particularly me. As it turned out, her boss wanted the entire app to be ready, not just a basic version. She had never informed him about our agreed-upon plan, or perhaps he had changed his mind. Subsequently, she informed everyone that the original plan had always been to fully release the app, portraying us as liars. Unfortunately, nobody supported our side, and by that point, I had already begun searching for a new job because I had had enough. Ultimately, we had to eliminate numerous features because it had become impossible to complete them. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. I remained at the company until the deadline, and the last task I performed was releasing the new app to every single user. One of the most crucial aspects of the app was the mobile ads, which generated revenue since the app itself was free. I created the ads exactly as instructed, testing them myself since the product owner hadn't bothered to test the app. Consequently, no one noticed that the new app had significantly fewer ads that appeared far less frequently. However, the app was plagued with bugs because we couldn't properly test everything given the workload and the lack of a tester within the short time frame. Within a month of its release, the ad revenue plummeted and users were dissatisfied with the app, causing many of them to migrate to other news apps. At this time, I was happily working elsewhere, and I heard that there was utter chaos surrounding the new app. Due to the revenue issues, the product owner and her boss even considered bringing back the old app, which was quite comical considering how poorly it functioned. The last time I checked, even the most dedicated programmer, who had miraculously remained at the company for over a decade, had said, "Screw it," and left shortly afterward. Years later, she is still employed there. The current team remains understaffed and overworked, and the apps are riddled with bugs and poorly managed. Meanwhile, I have the best job of my life, and everyone has been extremely satisfied with my management for many years. The next one is an entitled people story. My dad is elderly and has some mobility issues, as well as recent health problems within the last half year. 2 years ago, my mom passed away unexpectedly after a brief illness, which has been very difficult to cope with as I was extremely close to her. For the past 6 months, I have dedicated a significant portion of my life to help my dad. I temporarily moved in with him to provide assistance. He has been in the hospital several times, but now he's back home. However, I have had issues with him over time due to his narcissism, and I deeply regret this period of helping him. I even resent it in some ways because he shows no respect for me. Unfortunately, my sister hasn't been of much help either. I have previously posted about this issue here. Despite living only 20 minutes away, she rarely contributes, and most of the time, I'm the one doing all the work. Even when she does come over, she tends to micromanage my actions. Recently, my sister suffered a mild concussion, preventing her from joining us on Father's Day. Usually, we gather on Sundays for brunch. When my sister informed my dad about her absence due to the concussion, he expressed disappointment, solely thinking about himself. This morning was one of the few mornings I had the chance to sleep in. Weekends are usually the only time. During weekdays, I wake up early to assist my dad, so I slept in for an extra hour, went downstairs to give him my card, and wish him a happy Father's Day. However, he had already gone up to take a shower. I went out to get coffee, and upon my return I greeted him again, gave him my card, but he seemed annoyed, barely acknowledging it. Later, after I took a shower, I went downstairs and asked him if he wanted to go out for lunch, as we usually do on Sundays. He replied that he thought restaurants would be too crowded today and declined. However, he added, "You can just make me some French toast." He frequently phrases requests as commands, saying things like, "You can make me X," or, "If you want something to do, you can make me Y." Politeness, such as saying please, is rarely included. And when I point that out, he becomes upset. I was extremely bothered by his demanding tone and explained that we didn't have the necessary ingredients for French toast. Nevertheless, I offered to prepare something else if he wanted. In response, he remarked that it would have been nice if I had woken up early to cook him breakfast instead of sleeping in. Keep in mind that I am 31 years old, dealing with a narcissistic father, and yet I have still sacrificed a significant portion of my life to help him. He shows no respect or appreciation for my efforts. On Father's Day, he expects me to wake up early and cook him breakfast as if I were a little kid, when in reality, our normal plan was to go out. I expressed to him that I am with him every single day, taking care of various tasks, and that I had anticipated going out today, as we usually do. His demanding and disrespectful nature greatly bothers me, as if I'm only there to serve him. The next one is an entitled parent story. This happened in 2009 when I was 15, and my sister was 11. I honestly don't remember it well. I had to call my mother to fill me in on some details, and it helped a little. My parents got divorced when I was 10. My mother got primary custody, but we stayed with my father for about 3 days a week, sometimes more. They took turns celebrating the holidays with us. We'd spend them with one parent in 1 year, and with the other one the next. In March 2009, my father and his then-girlfriend, Molly, broke up after he confessed to cheating with the woman that eventually became SM. Years later, I found out that affair had been going on for almost 2 years by the time he told Molly. He introduced SM to us in May, on my birthday actually, and they almost immediately announced their engagement. From that moment, she started trying to force us all to be a happy blended family, which usually meant forcing us to do everything she, or sometimes my stepbrother, wanted, and pretending my mom wasn't in the picture. SM and my dad started pushing her to leave us with them a lot more often than my parents had previously agreed, but she thankfully wouldn't budge. We started getting ready for the holidays in November, and SM started talking about a ski resort. Hotel, I don't know, it was 14 years ago, that she wanted to visit with us. It was a 3-hour car drive from where we lived, and was clearly more suited for couples, younger children, or the elderly. Neither my sister nor I actually wanted to go, but before we could say that, SM asked us when we'd be done with school, so that she could book it for a 2-week trip during our winter break. I was happy to be the one to break it to her. We'd spent Christmas and New Year's Day with my father and Molly the year before, so it was my mom's turn to have us. My father and SM called my mother dozens of times to try to convince her to let them take us, insisting that SM was excited to spend Christmas with us and that the previous year's holidays didn't count because we'd spent them with Molly. My mom said no, as she'd already made plans, and the subject was dropped for a few weeks. Then, on our last day of school before winter break, SM picked me and my sister up from our schools. That was fine. We were supposed to spend a couple of days with my father before the holidays. What wasn't fine was that the moment we got into her car, SM said, "We're going to the ski resort, surprise!" She proceeded to tell us that they'd already packed our bags for us, and Dad would meet us there. I asked if my mom knew about this, and she said sure, but I knew that was a lie. I also didn't believe her when she said we'd only be there for a couple of days and would be back before Christmas. I figured they'd booked the 2-week stay they wanted and would probably guilt trip us both into staying once their couple of days were up. I was terrified. I didn't have a phone. My mom thought I was still too young to have one, didn't trust SM, and I could see my sister was even more scared. I told SM we didn't want to go. She said, "Fine, let's just pick stepbrother up from school." We picked him up from school. SM said, "Okay, now let's go to the resort." I said again that we didn't want to go. She said, "Fine, let's just find a gas station and fill up." That pattern repeated itself about 6 times over the next hour. Every time I said we didn't want to go, SM would make up an excuse and pretend to forget my plea. As we were about to leave town, my dad called SM. I heard them fight for a few minutes about something, and then she hung up. Stepbrother asked her what happened, but she didn't answer. Then she said, "I'm taking you kids to your mom's." She turned the car around and took us home. When we got there, my mom pulled us out of the car and screamed at SM to leave, which she did. My mom was hugging us and bawling as if she hadn't seen us in years. She didn't tell me the full story until a few days later. Basically, my mom called my dad in panic because he'd never told her we'd gotten home, which he always did whenever he picked us up from school. He was hoping she wouldn't call until we were already at the resort. My father knew that lying would do more harm than good, so he told her their plans. He tried to spin it around as something my sister wanted, but my mother didn't buy it. She told him that if SM didn't take us back to her place, she'd call the police. My father and SM took my stepbrother to the resort. For a few months after, they bragged about all the fun they had and all the things my sister and I had missed. Stepbrother later confided in me that he actually hated it. He barely saw his mom while they were there, and he spent Christmas mostly alone in their room. SM called us both selfish for trying to ruin their holidays. My sister actually felt guilty for a while, and I had to reassure her. My mom didn't call the cops or press charges. At the time, she didn't know if what SM did would qualify as a crime or if they'd actually help. She also feared that would ruin our relationship with my father, with whom she was still trying to stay on amicable terms. Years later, she told me she regretted not calling anyone, and that's the story of how I got my first phone. For some reason, I really hate this story. So much that I avoid talking about it. This text was actually on my drafts for almost a week. It's far from the worst thing SM has ever done, but it still pisses me off. I admit that writing it all down did help a little, though. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.